That's great. Yeah. It's the first time we're meeting, so good to meet
Yeah,
you,
in
I guess.
yeah on by voice, yeah, or voice and video.
Yeah, yeah, but I know from Kobe that you've spent a lot of time talking over the last, say, 2, 3 weeks.
Yeah, just about 2 weeks.
Okay, cool. And yeah, I'm excited to hear about some of your experience. I maybe did mention to you, but we are recording this call as well, and we'll be sharing it. I think many people are interested in what the process was. I think in your case, it was a bit kind of just in time, right?
Correct. Yeah. So um, the main thing that we were trying to resolve for was how do we build a way to sync entries offline for an app like a mobile app that we had already been building. And so that mobile app, the goal is to collect trash around the national park, specifically Yosemite. This is the major event that happens once a year. And Yosemite, most of the trails are they're not near cellular towers or not near Wi-Fi, and so we had this um, kind of this hard requirement to go offline. And we'd built some stuff last year, but it was no longer functioning because we had moved our development process over to FlutterFlow, and it didn't have the native ability for us to use the state management system we were using prior, which was Block. But even without Block, you have to do a lot of work in terms of getting everything to sync, and we just didn't have any of that work. And also, when we started building this product earlier this year or last year, um, we had not come across PowerSync, right? And then recently we went back to the Supabase like recommended vendors, and you were there. And so as soon as I found it, I was like, okay, cool. Let's like reach out. Let's see how we can get there. Had we had this earlier, it would have been, I mean, way better for our development process, because there was a event earlier this year in Mojave, and yeah, people lost all of their entries because there was no way to sync it back. And people had spent hours collecting this in like the desert. People were so frustrated it didn't get back. And yeah, we had to tell people, it's a beta software, and it was all in test flight at the time. It wasn't even in the App Store. And now we're in the App Store, thankfully. That all happened during the last 2 weeks. And so, yeah, it was just a painful exercise of how do you manage the syncing, how do you manage the entries, how do you do it in offline mode, how do you do it where even if you have intermittent connection, so you'll be considered online, but you don't have enough to actually send to a server. That's
Right.
where we lost a lot of entries. So if you're just purely airplane mode, it's a lot easier to handle. The
Mm.
complex part is when you have just enough internet, you're considered online, but not enough, because those just go to nowhere, right? Like you don't have it on the device and you don't have it on the back end.
Right. Yeah, there's a few interesting points that you raised there. Definitely the intermittent connectivity is an issue that a lot of people kind of struggle with, and that's where the offline first architecture, like you mentioned, is great. And the app crashing is another bit, which where the offline first architecture kind of prevents that data from being lost, even if it's not synced immediately. But I kind of want to go just back one more step and kind of understand your involvement with Five Gyres and how long you've been involved there and kind of yeah, just some context on that team.
Yeah, so I have this nonprofit initiative called AI on the Beach, which is ultimately working with nonprofits and even for-profits focused on improving the oceans. And so I met Five Gyres through an event I hosted with X Prize back in LA, and we also hosted them as well, where I met them through a group called Algalita, and then Five Gyres references the gyres in the ocean, where garbage is collected because of the way that the currents move. And these are massive amounts of these plastic blocks. Like, I mean, they're kind of like plastic islands in a way. And what the organization Five Gyres does is they try to figure out how do they resolve that challenge upstream. And so they work on identifying where trash is being, um, how does it get into the river system? How does it get into the water supply? How does it get into the uh, how does it get into the water before it goes into the ocean, right? And so
Right.
that TrashBlitz is an initiative that's global, and they work heavily with groups like Break Free from Plastic and other large, like there's surf riders, and there's a whole bunch of these organizations that Allison knows more about, but ultimately they have this like global initiative where they find where trash is, they collect it, they categorize it, and then they tag it with things like the logo or the brand that that product came from, the type of material it
Mm.
is, the type of item. And then what they do is they create a report every year that then is sent to these brands to let them know that, their product is all over is making up most of the trash. Now, companies will always say, well, we're not the ones littering, it's the consumers, and make the product, we're not the ones who buy it and dispose of it recklessly. But then on the other hand, with these guys, what Break Free from Plastic specifically says is that regardless of what it is, it's still a bad look to be majority of the garbage, whether you're Starbucks or Coca-Cola, because what people will see in these pictures is your brand. They're not going to see that like you're the one like who didn't purchase it. And so these companies end up, because of these annual reports, end up start looking at how do we change a material type? How do we do things that is more sustainable? How do we educate consumers on where to throw this out, especially where it becomes a problem? But a lot of the blame is placed on these other countries, but a lot of that is American trash that gets shipped over there. And so the problem is that there's a lot of finger pointing, and ultimately what we
Mm.
have to figure out are what are the solutions to resolve these kinds of bigger issues. And Five Jars is involved in both federal legislation and statewide legislation. And I mean, I don't know much about that world, but Allison can talk very deeply about, the entrenched interests that that try to maintain the status quo, and then the people who are actively trying to resolve these types of things. And I mean, to the credit of lawmakers, they do want to make sure that these things are handled well, but there are a lot of lobbying interests that have a lot of um, financial incentives to maintain the current way that we do things. And
Mm.
regardless of what they know about what's happening to the world, we have to continue to do the work that we do to ensure that people have the right information when they're deciding on how the legislation will be played out. So California is doing some pretty interesting things. Colorado had some interesting bills in play. So for that, I mean, like Allison's the expert.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating to me as well. Just the idea of a cleanup at, say, Yosemite National Park, where if you do the cleanup, it's great. You've cleaned up all the trash that's there, and then 6 months later, it's back in the state that it was just before the cleanup. But if you're actually tracking the data of what is it that you're picking up, what are the types of things that are being left behind, and then that actually empowers you to perhaps take action, no pun intended, but further upstream, where you can maybe get some of these corporations to change their the materials that they use, or the ways in which they encourage recycling and things like that.
Exactly. Also, you can tell what areas of the park have the most amount of trash. If there's needs to be more types of trash bins there's more education. You can also start to tell what kind of products there are, or is it mostly, coming straight from the store that they sell out of, or is it people bringing their own products? Is it mostly things that people are like, on a hike and then just decide to toss it out, or they like climbers, like all of those types of things is what you get a lot of established behaviors around. And then, like you could also tell which countries and states take this most seriously, which ones don't. But then there's also these like conflating factors as well, of like where's the trash coming from? Because if you go to other countries, you'll see a lot of American trash. Like, okay, clearly that's not theirs. But then you'll see trash that's local, and that's a big thing. And then I've been working with the Five Jars team for 4 years. It's 2019, and a lot of it was through the pandemic. And so I got to understand like how the organization functions, both when the world is open and when it like gets shut down, and what are the types of things that they really care about. And when things were, much more quiet during the pandemic, there were still people going out around their neighborhoods, around their, schools that were closed, and still picking up trash, still looking at what was happening, still trying to keep their communities clean. And once things started to come back up, then people started doing the same things around their office, same things around hospitals, same things around parks. And then, now that it's fully back and active, now we have a lot more things. Trails are
Mm.
open, and even during the pandemic, trails were open. So it's just interesting to see the behavior shift over time as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, then I guess fast forward through the pandemic to how maybe Kobe, this is a good question for you. How did you and Praful kind of start working together?
Let's see. I think Praful joined the PowerSync Discord, I think, on September 5th. You were like, if you guys can just tell us what to do, we'll do it. I took a look at the app and the 5 Jars initiative, and I've spent like months and months sailing on oceans. Actually got a master's degree in marine science, and I don't know, the whole initiative just like resonated with me. Because I'm a big fan also of the ocean cleanup. I don't know if you've heard of them, but that's like Boyan Slat. He's that young guy from the Netherlands, I think, and they go around like actually collecting trash out of the oceans. And I realized like if TrashBlitz like wins, then ocean cleanup goes out of business. Like if we can stop it at the source, there's no need to clean up the oceans. So that got me pretty excited. And then I think we just started working together on Discord. The stack for the app, was a Flutter app built using FlutterFlow with a Supabase backend, and it was actually our first FlutterFlow integration. Well, yeah, integration. So we should probably chat a little bit about that because
we hacked some stuff together just because it was the code that comes out of FlutterFlow is not the most convenient to work out of. There's a lot of duplication, and so I mean there was just a lot there. And
Well,
so
maybe
to
we
talk about
can.
the story, we were just in a position like, okay, look, we have a week to launch, 2 weeks to launch this. We have no clear direction on how this stuff works. We looked at the tutorials on the website, but as we were talking about, FlutterFlow does not follow that particular paradigm of Flutter development. So it's not a very easy drop in place. So I have another app that I have for my company, and that's built in Swift. And whenever we need to integrate a new library, it's pretty simple. We have like things laid out in a way that you can immediately initialize it. Then you can added to the key parts of the app. So when we added analytics, when we added, other types of systems, it was really easy in my core app. But with the FlutterFlow app, because we had built it like a few different times. Like we had a particular developer build it in Block, then another one use another framework, another one, and then eventually we're like, look, like this is getting way too complicated. Let's just put it in FlutterFlow. It allows it to be drag and drop, allows people who are both technical and non-technical to view the designs without having to see the full thing fleshed out. And when you're writing code and you're trying to do design at the same time, there's a lot of things that don't work because it doesn't carry forward really well. And so you get Figma designs and you have to implement it. So like, okay, let's cut that all out. But then the generated code, which is what we needed to integrate with, that was a lot more complex to work with, and that's where Kobe really helped us out a lot, because we were like really lost about like what is happening and how does it work. And also there's this complexity, and it's an open issue with Supabase right now, which is that they don't really support offline mode because of their auth. Like, so that was a whole other like set of like we had to get in the weeds there, and that was just really bizarre because it's not a problem you'll face during testing. It's a problem you face when you're actually out, and then you have an expired token, or you have something that you close the app and then come back, but you've been in offline mode. Now you can't even get into the core application because you don't have a valid token, and then you can't obviously authenticate either. So there's a whole bunch of these little problems with to solve in 2 weeks.
Right, right. Yeah, this is all fascinating. I guess so. Maybe the point to start is for people that might not be aware. Maybe you can just give a quick overview of what FlutterFlow is.
Sure.
Yeah. So should I do that, or Kobe? Do you want to do that?
I've used it more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So ultimately, what FlutterFlow is this drag and drop tool to allow people to build mobile apps. And the way it works is that ultimately it's kind of, I don't know if you remember back in the day, Dreamweaver or any of those tools, which allowed you to, put things on a GUI layout, and then it would generate the code for you. So that's the same concept with FlutterFlow, and it's very, very convenient. So they have a lot of really good integrations with things like Supabase. They have really good integrations with APIs. They have a lot of good ways to build things very quickly. But the challenge is, how do you do it in a way that is because once you start working with the core code base, it is very complicated. So if you stay within their editor, it's really straightforward. But as soon as you have to write, custom code or do anything with their actual code base, it gets really, really complex. And then the other complexity that happened recently is Xcode updated, so that caused a bunch of issues. FlutterFlow had a bug in it that didn't allow us to build anymore, and we were updating the code base to resolve some of the issues with Supabase and with the FlutterFlow design. And so a lot of those are like cascading issues that happen one after the other, and there was no really good solution. So we basically had to just work through it one at a time.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I think I've seen and used Webflow before. I wonder if the naming comes from the same place, but yeah, it's essentially like you've got control over a lot of the UI and the functionality, but then it generates the code yourself. And like you mentioned, especially with applications, you've probably got a lot of dependencies or external libraries that you want to integrate into the code base, and that can get tricky. So that was the point of departure. So how did we solve the challenge of working with FlutterFlow?
So working with FlutterFlow, that was not resolved by PowerSync. That was just stuff we had to power through. What was resolved was, there is no convenient way to run and do offline first development with Flutter out of the box, or I think even with Swift or with any of these types of systems, right? Because ultimately what we're doing is we're replicating everything you've already done, right? We have to put everything into some kind of local database, whether it's SQLite or something else. Then we have to figure out how do we end up syncing that back with our core Supabase client or Supabase instance, and then how do we ensure that something's not duplicated, or we have to resend the data, get offline first development. You also have to think about that you lose authentication. What happens in the case that you're unable to get, if you have intermittent connections? And so a lot of that was something that we didn't have experience doing, and Supabase just made it, or PowerSync just made that really.
Right, right. Yeah, I think we're Praful on your side, but I'm getting just some intermittent breakups.
Yeah, just to riff off that a bit more, in FlutterFlow's defense, because I've looked at a bunch of those no-code app builders, and with many of them you can't even get to the generated code. You're just kind of stuck in this GUI. And the nice thing about FlutterFlow is that you can actually link your app to a GitHub repository, which is what we ended up doing. And there's actually a branch in the app now, in the repository now, called PowerSync. And then you can actually deploy from that branch. So you kind of like make your UI changes in the GUI, and then you can pull those changes into the PowerSync branch, and then deploy to the App Store from the PowerSync branch. In theory, at least, it'll be good, because I think the app went to production last week Thursday, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, so we sent them. No, we went live. Sorry.
So yeah, it would be. That's one of the things I wanted to chat about today was, if that model, Praful, if you think that model is kind of sustainable, going forward.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm in a self-driving car right now, and they told me I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, so I had to had to put on my seatbelt. So that's why it started going like crazy. Anyway, so yeah. So what I was saying is that yes. So we went live last Tuesday, just in time for the event on Wednesday. Then we found there was a major bug. So Kobe and I worked on it, and then we got the product in, and then we updated it. So on Tuesday, we got the second build in, and then it got approved in like a few hours on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, we found another bug, and we got it again Wednesday morning. And so a lot of we've gone live.
That's the world-class San Francisco 5G coverage kicking in there.
Yeah. Okay. So there was some last minute changes, and the question, Kobe, that you had was like whether that approach of like going via PowerSync kind of at the end of the process, as a developer experience, Praful, I guess the question was like, was that fine? It seems like it worked, since you had to make these updates, and that also followed the same process, and you were able to get them done relatively quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, to work with PowerSync was probably the easiest thing that we had to do, right? Because it was like fairly straightforward with what we know of how to do Flutter development, right? So with Flutter, we've been working with it for quite a while. We haven't with the frame things calling Supabase directly. We've opted with PowerSync, and it's just straightforward SQL code, which is in many cases more convenient than an ORM for what we're trying to do. Because it's just simple select statements and simple updates, which is a lot simpler than trying to. But even with Supabase, it's pretty easy. So it wasn't really that crazy to learn about it, and then we, because of the way things were laid out, we built like a little Python script to generate some of the models for PowerSync. And so, we took the Supabase output for the schema. That was a a TypeScript file. Then we converted that into Flutter models, and then we dropped it into our code base. And then whenever we needed to call it, we called it directly from wherever we needed to replace the Supabase code. So that was fairly straightforward. I mean, there were certain hiccups, but Kobe helped us a lot there, and so that was super useful. But in terms of just the development, I don't think there was anything that was very problematic, except for the Supabase stuff of how do we maintain our authentication. And I think the other thing that was a little challenging was to know whether or not, things had been synced to the backend. And so Kobe helped us to determine like when things were still in our offline database and when things were synced. And that was really, really useful, because then users could look at this very simple sync progress bar that told us, hey, you have 8 things that are offline. zero things, everything's been synced. All of those things were just like nice additions that we would never have built ourselves.
Right. Yeah, Kobe, maybe you can elaborate on how that works with PowerSync.
Yeah, there are two API methods in the PowerSync SDK. The one is, are you online or offline? And so we use that to, show a little indicator of like, hey, you're currently offline. And then actually there are three. The second one is, what's the size of your upload queue? So let's say the device has gone offline and you've been capturing trash items, and so that the upload queue that has to sync back keeps growing. And so we show that to users, like how much data do you still have left to upload? And then the third one was when last did you fully download all the data from the server? Maybe there are some updates from the server side that you need to download, like new events or whatever it could be. So then we kind of just built that into a little hamburger menu bar on the side. When you open it up, it shows you your offline mode statistics. But to circle back to the model generator that Praful built, I remember, because I think that the app has quite a few tables. I think it's around like 20 tables or something, maybe a bit less, 15. And then I implemented one. And I think Praful looked at this and he was like, okay, we got 14 left. I'm not doing that by hand. And he wrote a little Python script to auto-generate the remaining models. So that was pretty cool. I was wondering, I was thinking we should actually share that with the rest of the PowerSync community. It's a bit hacky, but I mean, it gets the job done and it's better than nothing. Are you cool if we share that gist that you posted, Praful?
Yeah, what I'll also do is update it so that it imports the right files as well. But yeah, I can share that just right now, and then we'll make the update to it in a bit.
Cool. Yeah, I think it loads a JSON file from /temp or something. Is that what you're referring to? That should actually fetch via Supabase Postgres API?
Yeah, we should do that. But also, there's just actually the tool that we were using.
Hi, breaking up a bit.
For PowerSync community the entire time.
Sorry, Praful, if you could repeat that. You said the tool that you were using and then something about the PowerSync community the entire time?
Oh, I was saying that one of your colleagues had written the library that powered that entire tool that we were using to get the schema from PowerSync.
I see. Does that make sense to you, Kobe?
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. You were
back
breaking
now,
up
yeah.
before, but
Okay.
yeah, loud and clear now.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
great.
thing is that I have to get his new phone because like my phone continues to like I can hear you guys perfectly, but I can't. It doesn't push the voices effectively. So sorry about that.
Not
All right.
all good.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
So the
Okay.
schema generator, yeah, that definitely sounds like something that'd be valuable to the community. And I guess we can get to, yeah, how's the use of the app going? I guess we can see some of the stats and stuff. The app is available on the App Store. I don't know, I guess anyone can download it, although they're probably not part of the official cleanup mission, so they probably can't see that kind of data. But of the folks that are using this in Yosemite, do we have an idea of how it's going?
Yeah. So there were like certain things as part of the core app that people people used it and they were able to get a lot of benefit and it was offline. There are certain things causing crashes, so we just enabled crash analytics again, so we're going to get a better understanding of what that looks like. But overall, even when the app crashed, even when they were offline, all the entries got recorded and synced, so we were really happy about that. And there were a few thousand volunteers, but using an app as part of the flow is still relatively new. So we're still educating people on how to do that and everything. So we're going to look at the stats today now that the event is officially over, and then we'll give you a report about what the use case was over time.
Okay, great. Yeah, that'll definitely be very interesting to see.
Are there any more events coming up where they intend on using the app?
Yeah, so ultimately anybody can use the app. We have ongoing annual trash cleanups, whether it's break free from plastic, or if you go to a national park, you could use this. And then so anybody is anyone and everyone is encouraged to use this because it is annual stuff. But there are these types of uh, events that are like basically TrashBlitz is the name. Is like where a bunch of people get together, volunteer, and work on it. So in San Francisco, we have a weekly cleanup around my house. So when the next time I go, I'm going to bring this to everyone's attention. And what's ironic is that around San Francisco, we lose connection very frequently depending on what service provider you have. And so there'll be blocks where you'll turn and then you'll just go from 5G to nothing, and then you'll go back to 5G. And it just doesn't make any sense where you're in the heart of technology, but it happens very frequently. So having offline mode made it, when we didn't have offline first, it made it prohibitive for anyone, including the people I used to work, go to these weekly trash cleanups with, from using it because they'd lose all their entries if they turned a corner.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this is part of, I guess, our our thinking is that offline first is just a great kind of default architecture for applications that, maybe not all applications, like Kobe mentioned, you don't want FaceTime to be offline first necessarily, but for any kind of data capturing app, offline first definitely makes a lot of sense just for these edge cases so that you know that your app is always going to be available and you're not going to be unexpectedly, prevented from doing what you need to do.
Yeah, and especially when the app crashes, like which happened fairly frequently, and now we're gonna capture why that is. That is incredibly frustrating if like an app crashes and you lose all your data. Here, we don't have to worry about that. And so I was a lot more relieved when we had it in the system because, inevitably there'll be some edge case that'll come up because, you're testing it live, that we were able to retain all of the data on ongoing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, every data mutation gets persisted to disk on the device. So if the app crashes, no problem. It's still, on disk. So yeah, that's for sure a big one.
Great.
Yeah, and then the other part of this is like and I think the intermittent connection. That's a hard problem that like when we previously were like, if you're offline, then store it locally. If you're online, store it, push it to the database. It doesn't work for that model. And so basically you just have to assume you're offline all the time. But if you don't build that in as your core part of your architecture, it's very hard to do it later unless you have a system like yours. Because otherwise, you have to rebuild everything from the ground up to save to SQL or to something to persistent to disk and then to sync it. But that's just a very complex set of engineering. We tried. It just didn't work.
Yeah. And just to make sure that I have the facts straight, so was this like the first version of the application, or what, and then you just integrated PowerSync into it, or was this like the app had existed for some time and you had to like integrate PowerSync after the fact? So like you had to make it work with everything that was already built.
It was a second iteration, and it was uh, uh, we had a fully developed code base from FlutterFlow. So FlutterFlow makes it even more complex to do offline mode because they have an entire separate state management system. They have their own way of generating code, and they have their own methods to call Supabase. So we had to got a lot of that and work and implement PowerSync after the fact, which is a lot more complicated than just building it in from the ground up.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Wow. Yeah, that is impressive, especially looking at the timelines that you guys worked with.
Yeah, and we had to get the app live in the App Store where it was just test flight within a week and a half. Because 2 weeks was when the product would get into we would have to use it, and so we needed to also provide some training to people. So yeah, it was very tight timelines, and that was something that I mean, and the thing is, like, we had been looking for a solution for a little bit over a year, but we just couldn't find anything until it just popped up on the Supabase comment maybe like a couple of weeks ago. And so that's when we were like, okay, we should definitely try this out. This is exactly what we're looking for. We had looked at Replicache, but that doesn't have a Flutter SDK. And there's also other challenges with Replicache in general. So like a lot of the solutions we had been trying to hack in just didn't work the way we anticipated.
Right, right. Yeah, well, this is all great to hear, Praful, and I'm very happy that you are happy to share this with us, and that PowerSync ended up being a solution for you guys. And I hope that we can continue seeing the impact of PowerSync and TrashBlitz going forward. I don't know, Kobe, if there's anything else that you wanted to touch on this call, but it's been super insightful so far.
I think we broke up a little bit, but Praful, what are your thoughts in terms of recommending this to other FlutterFlow users in the same position? You know, as like, do you think it's sustainable? Because it's a little bit hacky, admittedly. But you know, and we did this as like a once-off export. You know, we took the code out, we injected PowerSync, wired up all of the UI to, you know, hydrate from disk and persist to disk instead of using the Supabase client. But going forward, you know, if people are making changes in FlutterFlow and trying to pull those changes in, do you think that's like a bit brittle, or do you think it can work? Or yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
It was really funny you mentioned that because I just did that on Tuesday. So we had to make some changes and we had to pull them in. So that's where Git comes super handy, because what you do is you do a Git diff, and then you do and then you merge it in. And honestly, all of the changes persisted. There's only one thing, but that was not related to PowerSync. It was related to the way that we had updated like some of the term, like we updated some messaging, and so that caused a conflict. But overall, everything stayed the same. It worked. It's still in the system. None of the models got adjusted. All of our calls stayed the same. And so when you look at that pull request, only the changes that were the new feature got added into the code base. Everything else stayed the same.
Okay,
So
great.
for us, like, this is great because like people can still work in FlutterFlow. We still push it to the FlutterFlow branch. We then do a Git diff, and then we move it. And then this is actually on top of the fact that I also created another branch to introduce our analytics system, and that was off of the PowerSync branch. Then I had to merge in the FlutterFlow changes and my changes. So this was a fairly complex two branch merge, and it still worked really, really well.
Great.
So I would suggest, I mean, it is going to be a lot more complicated than just adding it directly into FlutterFlow, but
Right.
what I would suggest is like anybody who wants to use this should, because as long as you know Flutter itself, like you have to still be a developer.
Yeah.
But once
Yeah.
this gets implemented, and you know, I've been talking to those guys in the core flow itself, then you know, obviously it's a no-brainer. But until then, but also like we still have to hack that Supabase thing. So what I'm planning to do is open source this code base so people can see how we implemented everything and what the changes were. And you'll get to see the core FlutterFlow branch, you'll get to see the PowerSync branch, and then you can do a comparison to see what the changes we made were. Because there are some important things we had to do to the Supabase auth. There are certain important things we had to do the way that we call the model or call the select and update. and there was certain types of things that we needed to make sure worked. But once those are all in place, then it was trivial to make updates after that.
Cool. Yeah,
Separately, do you
open
guys want
sourcing
to
that
see
would be
like a
great.
self-driving car in action?
Yeah, let's see it.
So it's like
Nice.
coming to a stop, but it's like steering, and there's like no driver, right? So it's like kind of creepy.
What make of car is that?
This is a Jaguar something. So yeah, and then it tells you like where you are, what like cars are around you, all of that stuff. So now we're like starting to move.
Is that the
Um,
Waymo W?
yeah, this is the Waymo. There's also Cruise as well, but the Cruise almost killed me, so I refuse to take it
No
anymore.
way.
Yeah, it almost drove into a pole, and then it got stuck in the middle of an intersection, and a bus almost hit me. So I try not to take those as much anymore.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah, but the Waymo is super
Crazy.
clear. It's super,
Azure
super.
became okay, yeah.
This is so cool to be part of this, and it's cheaper than Uber, so it's like really good. Anyway, that's an aside. As part of and hopefully anyone who was in the audience, it was fun. But yeah, I mean overall, like working with PowerSync and FlutterFlow, despite all of the challenges, I mean the fact that we got everything done in a few days. Plus, we got it into the system and fixed major bugs with it all in a week and a half. Plus, Apple accelerated our approval because it was offline mode. And I think that there is something about offline mode is because when we added that to another app, Apple does prefer those types of apps than when they're not offline first because the experience is so much better to people. And we got a lot fewer complaints about the same things that we used to because of and maybe it's because we expedited the review, or maybe it's because it's offline first, but it's really hard to tell with Apple approvals. But what they do is when I've talked to other developers, they give affordances when you have things that are closer to what they think of an ideal app.
Right. Yeah, that is super interesting.
Yeah, and pro tip, you can expedite your App Store submission. There's a form you can fill out with Apple. And we actually did that. I can't remember which day it was on, Tuesday or whatever. And then it was like an hour later, they approved it. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and that was incredible. Like once we figured out how that worked, as long as it looks like a bug fix, they'll get to it very fast. And then once you actually do fix a bug, it's yeah, it was super fast. Like we got things in that I didn't even think was possible. And it was all credit to one, the technology, and also the team that's working at PowerSync that we were able to do this. I mean, I don't think that there was a way for us to get this to production in the timeframes we had anticipated without all of the stuff being available and ready for us to use.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great to hear. Well, I think yeah, this is all fascinating. Maybe before we wrap up, we can just check if there are any questions from the audience. I saw that someone asked whether you can exit the ride, whether you can exit the car mid-ride like in RoboCop, but I don't think that's relevant to the.
Yeah, you can. So there's a whole thing called pullover right here. So you can
Oh.
pull over and it'll let you get off. So they've done that for people who are uncomfortable or get sick or some other thing. I mean, right now, like people are just honking at this car because it wasn't taking a turn correctly. So there's a lot of like little things that they have to work out. But it's more the Waymo's way more conservative in the way it drives than the Cruise.
Interesting. Okay. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So yeah, Praful, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is super useful. Like I mentioned, we'll also do a posted recording of this. I think it'll be useful for other folks. Anyone that's done or wants to do, PowerSync plus FlutterFlow development, I think you'll be a great resource for them as well. So yeah, thanks for joining, and we're happy that we could have supported you as far as we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're once we open source everything, we'll let the community know. And if there's any questions, obviously, we're part of the Discord, so just at me. That's the messages I get to see. Otherwise, I mean, Kobe's like the expert on this now as well. So I'm sure Kobe, you have some of the most learnings about this. And yeah, I've just been telling the FlutterFlow team that they should just make this as default because it's the #1 requested thing in the FlutterFlow forums. It's like, how do we do offline mode? Because
Mm.
I mean, when you have an app and you don't have offline mode, it's yeah, like you get really frustrated users, and all apps should be offline first, except for obviously like synchronous only systems, but those are fairly rare compared to what are offline first. So
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Praful. Hopefully you get to your destination safely. But
yeah,
yeah,
I mean, um, this one I'm pretty secure about, but yeah.
nice. Great. Well, have a great rest of your day. Kirby, thanks as well for joining. And yeah, we will have another community call tomorrow. But this was a great conversation. Cheers, everyone, and see you on the Discord.